This video is audio content only. It does not contain any video footage or images. If you are expecting visual content, please be aware. This is intentionally provided in an audio-only format. We recommend listening to the audio rather than watching the screen. Thank you for your understanding. Welcome to the quiet edge of reality. In the tradition of Kaidan, we gather to speak of things that should not be, yet stubbornly remain. These are accounts of the persistent shadow, the familiar face that isn't quite right, and the heavy price of ancient rules. As the lights dim, remember that some doors, once opened, cannot be closed. Listen closely, not just to the words, but to the silence between them. In this world, the most terrifying thing isn't what is hiding, it is what has been waiting for you to notice it. Chapter 1. The Man with the White Umbrella. A person dressed in white, carrying a white umbrella. It started a few years ago. I'd been hanging out at a friend's place, and since it was getting late and the rain was coming down hard, I gave him a ride home. On my way back, I realized I hadn't picked up the latest issue of my favorite comic series, so I pulled into a 24-hour gas station market. I was the only customer in the place. I grabbed the first volume off the rack and started browsing, but when I happened to look up, I saw someone walking past the front of the store. They were dressed in head-to-toe white, shielded by a stark white umbrella. I remember thinking, who the hell is out for a stroll at this hour? But I just shrugged it off and went back to my reading. By the time I finished the first book and reached for the next one, I glanced at the window again. There they were. The same person was walking past the front of the store once more. There's a decent-sized parking lot between the sidewalk and the storefront, so I didn't get a close-up look at their face, but the clothes and that rhythmic, steady gait were unmistakable. It was definitely the same person. I thought it was a bit odd. Maybe they were just pacing or waiting for someone, but I didn't give it much more thought. I finished the second book. The clerk had just finished stocking the new weekly magazines, so I reached for one, rolling my stiff shoulders as I did. That's when I saw them for the third time. The same white umbrella, the same white clothes, drifting past the window in the exact same direction. A cold shiver crawled down my spine. It was officially creepy. I decided right then not to look out the window anymore and buried my face in the pages. I powered through 2 more issues, made some small talk with the clerk I recognized from my usual shifts, bought some snacks, and headed for the door. The rain had let up a bit, but I didn't want to get caught in another downpour, so I hurried toward the sidewalk. The moment I stepped out, my heart nearly stopped. There, just a few yards ahead of me, was the person with the white umbrella. This is a pretty rural area, so there were almost no cars on the road at that hour. Street lights are few and far between, and once you move away from the glow of the gas station, the darkness is absolute. It made the figure in white look even more ghostly. I really don't like this, I muttered to myself. I intentionally slowed my pace, trying to put some distance between us, but for some reason the gap kept closing. I couldn't believe how slowly they were moving. When I got within 10 feet of them, a wave of pure dread washed over me. I didn't want to get any closer, and I certainly didn't want to pass them. I decided to take a shortcut down a side alley a bit earlier than usual. Just as I made the decision, the figure turned into that very same alley. Part of me was relieved they were off the main path, but another part of me felt guilty for being so paranoid. I felt bad for judging a stranger who hadn't actually done anything to me. As they turned the corner, I gave a small, polite nod toward their back, a silent apology for my thoughts. In that instant, I heard them say something. It was a low, muffled sound. I froze, but since they didn't turn around, I tried to convince myself they were just talking to themselves. I kept walking straight, planning to cross the next block. As I reached the intersection, I glanced down the parallel street to my right. It was a standard residential neighborhood, rows of quiet houses tucked away in the dark. And there, walking down that parallel street, was the person with the white umbrella. My skin turned to ice. There was no way. Even with my slow pace, I should have been ahead of them, and they had been walking at a snail's crawl. But now they were moving with a strange, wide, stretching stride, keeping perfect pace with me from one block over. I tried to shake the feeling. It's just a coincidence, I told myself. Maybe it's just someone with a disability or a local eccentric playing a game. But no matter how many side streets I passed, every time I looked to my right, that white umbrella was there, moving through the shadows of the next street over. I tried speeding up, then slowing down to a crawl, but every time I reached a gap between the houses, they were right there, crossing at the exact same moment. Panic finally took over. I stopped caring how I looked and bolted for the main boulevard. I kept telling myself, I'm just running because the rain is picking up. I just don't want to get wet. When I reached the main road, the sight of a few passing cars brought a massive surge of relief. I looked back down the street as I crossed, but the figure was gone. Besides, there was no crosswalk where that parallel alley met the boulevard. They couldn't have crossed even if they wanted to. Still, just to be sure, I braced myself and looked down the first side street after crossing the main road. Empty. I checked the next one. Nothing. I started to calm down, my breathing returning to normal. Just turn here, I whispered, reaching my usual turnoff. Almost home. I turned right onto my street, and there, stepping out from the shadows of a driveway, was the person with the white umbrella. They turned and started walking directly toward me. Every hair on my body stood on end. Before I could even think, I was sprinting back the way I came. I didn't look back. I hung a hard left into the next alley, trying to lose them, but as soon as I turned the corner, there they were again, standing in the middle of the path. They didn't turn around normally. They pivoted their entire body in a stiff, jerky motion until they were facing me, then began to advance. In the middle of that silent, pitch-black neighborhood, the few streetlights made that white outfit and umbrella glow with a sickening clarity. I lost it. I let out a scream that probably woke the whole block. I dropped my bag of snacks and my own umbrella and just ran. I pulled out my phone and called my friend, the one I dropped off earlier. I woke him up, rambling and begging him to let me back in. Even though I'd just left his place a couple of hours ago, he heard the terror in my voice and told me to come over. I ran toward his neighborhood, crossing back over the main boulevard and passing the gas station again. But as I went to make the final turn toward his house, I saw the white umbrella standing right there at the corner. At that point, my brain just broke. I couldn't process the how anymore. I skipped the turn and ran for the next block, but the figure stepped out from behind a parked car there, too. I was trapped. Suddenly, my phone buzzed. It wasn't a call coming in. It was a notification for 3 missed calls. I looked at the clock and gasped. It was after 4 a.m. In my head, only 10 minutes had passed since I left the store, but an hour had vanished into thin air. The town I'd lived in my whole life felt like a foreign, hostile maze. I called my friend back, my voice shaking so hard I could barely speak. "Where are you?" he asked, sounding groggy. "Why aren't you here yet?" "I can't get there," I sobbed. "I can't make the turn. Every time I try, that thing with the white umbrella is already there, waiting for me. It's like it's getting ahead of me." There was a long silence on the other end. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said, his voice suddenly very serious. "But if it's cutting you off, you have to use that against it. Let it chase you instead." "What? What are you talking about? That makes no sense," I yelled, my frustration boiling over into hysterics. He spoke slowly and clearly, like he was talking me off a ledge. "Listen to me. Turn the opposite way of where you actually want to go. If it's anticipating you, it'll appear in front of you to block that path, right? Once it shows up, turn around and run the other way. If it's busy blocking the wrong direction, you can get to where you need to be." I was desperate enough to try anything. I told him I'd try and followed his instructions. My mind was completely blank, operating on pure survival instinct. I turned away from his house toward a dead-end street. Sure enough, the white umbrella appeared at the end of the block, standing perfectly still. I immediately spun on my heel and sprinted back toward my friend's street. It worked. The figure didn't follow me past the corner. It would reach the edge of the intersection, stop, and then retreat back into the shadows. But every time I tried to take a normal shortcut, it would reappear ahead of me. Just as I thought I was finally clear, I heard it. There was no one around, but a sound drifted through the rain from right behind my ear. It wasn't words. It was a series of low, guttural groans. "Oh, oh, ah." I didn't need a translator to know that the thing was talking. I pushed my legs until they burned, running faster than I ever had in my life. I finally reached my friend's street. I called him, and he told me he was standing out on his front porch waiting for me. When I skidded into his yard, I was drenched to the bone and shaking. He tried to make a joke about me losing my umbrella, but the look on my face stopped him. I pointed back toward the road I'd just come from. Even through the rain and the distance, we could both see it. Standing under a flickering streetlight at the far intersection was a figure in white, holding a white umbrella. We scrambled inside and locked every bolt on the door. For the rest of the night, we heard a low, vibrating hum, like a man's voice at a very low pitch, circling the house. My friend's cat spent the entire night hissing at the windows and the front door, pacing back and forth with its fur standing on end. When the sun finally came up and the sound of morning traffic filled the air, the heavy, oppressive feeling in the house vanished. That afternoon, we drove to an old chapel a few towns over that was known for dealing with unusual things. The minister there was ancient, his hands trembling as he spoke to us. He didn't ask for details. He just performed a blessing and told us, It is best to forget. There are many things in this world that defy understanding, and I cannot tell you what that was. I know this story might seem disjointed or hard to follow, but even now, years later, the memory of it makes me go cold. I can't think about it rationally. But if any of you ever find yourself in a situation where the road ahead seems to be waiting for you, remember what my friend told me. Don't try to outrun it. Make it follow you. Chapter 2. The Woman at the Trash Enclosure. This happened about 4 years ago. At the time, I was living alone in a small studio apartment in a quiet suburb. It was one of those generic complexes filled with single professionals who were rarely home, and because of that, people were pretty lazy when it came to the trash. The rules for the dumpster area were rarely followed. People would toss their bags wherever, leave cardboard boxes unfolded, and ignore the pickup schedule entirely. I'll admit, I wasn't perfect either. I'd often sneak my bags out in the middle of the night just to avoid the hassle of doing it properly during the day. One morning, I headed out to the trash enclosure on my way to work. If you've lived in an apartment, you know the type. A small, fenced-in area with heavy wooden gates to keep the bins out of sight. As I approached, I noticed someone standing right in front of the gate. It was an older woman, probably in her late 60s, dressed in drab, oversized clothes. She was just standing there, staring at me as I approached with my garbage bag. She looked angry, her eyes narrowed into a sharp glare. But the thing that really got to me was the sound she was making. It was a sharp, wet, clicking noise, like she was snapping her tongue against the roof of her mouth over and over. Tsk, tsk, tsk. I've always been a bit of a pushover, so I just gave her a quick, awkward nod and hurried past her to toss my bag into the bin. She didn't move an inch. Even as I walked away, I could hear that rhythmic, sickening clicking sound following me down the sidewalk. I figured she was just some eccentric neighbor, or maybe a self-appointed member of the HOA who had decided to become the trash police. I hoped I wouldn't run into her again, but within a week, she was there every single morning. I started to dread taking the trash out, wondering if she was going to report me for some minor infraction. A few days later, I ran into another tenant near the bins, a woman around my age named Sarah, who lived a few doors down. She was on her work too, and we exchanged a polite good morning. After we both dropped off our bags, she lingered a bit, waiting for me to catch up. Once we were a safe distance away, she leaned in and whispered, "Okay, is it just me, or is that old lady a total creep? She stands there clicking her teeth at me every morning. It's honestly terrifying." I felt a wave of relief knowing I wasn't the only one. "I know, right? I thought she was the building manager or something," I replied. "If she is, she's a psycho," Sarah said, her voice getting a little louder. "I mean, who spends their entire morning? Hey, do it right! Follow the schedule!" A raspy, distorted scream erupted from behind us. We both spun around to see the old woman standing by the dumpster gate, shaking her fist at us. Her face was contorted with rage. Sarah and I didn't say a word. We just bolted her our cars and got out of there as fast as we could. We figured that even if she was some overzealous manager, we should probably just stick to the rules to keep her off our backs. But about 2 weeks later, I got called away for an emergency 4-day business trip. I was planning to head straight to my parents' house afterward for the weekend, and I realized I had a week's worth of trash sitting in my kitchen. I didn't want to leave it there to rot and attract bugs, But I knew if I went out in the morning, she'd be there to scream at me for not following the bulk pickup schedule. I decided to sneak out at 11 o'clock the night before my trip. I figured the trash warden would be long gone by then. The complex was dead silent as I walked toward the enclosure. The streetlights were dim, casting long, flickering shadows across the pavement. I reached the wooden gate, pulled it open, and tossed my heavy bag into the darkness of the bin. Tsk. The sound was right there. My blood turned to ice. I slowly turned my head toward the corner of the brick enclosure, just behind the gate. There, crouched on the concrete floor in the shadows, was the old woman. She was huddled in a ball, staring up at me with wide, unblinking eyes. Tsk, tsk. The sound echoed off the brick walls in the midnight silence. I didn't apologize. I didn't explain. I just turned and sprinted back to my apartment. I slammed the door, locked every bolt, and crawled into bed with the lights on, shivering under the covers until the sun came up. The next morning, I didn't even look toward the dumpsters as I drove away from my trip. The memory of her sitting there in the dark haunted me the entire time I was away. I spent my nights in the hotel staring at the door, wondering if I'd see that glare again. By the time I was heading back on Sunday evening, my anxiety had turned into a heavy, sinking dread. What if she was waiting for me? When I pulled into the complex, I saw a police cruiser parked near the entrance. A small crowd had gathered near the front office, and I saw Sarah talking to an officer. As soon as she saw my car, she pointed me out. The officer waved me over. "We're talking to everyone who had run-ins with the woman at the trash enclosure," the officer said, pulling out a notepad. He explained the situation. It turned out she wasn't a manager or even a resident. She was a transient with a history of severe mental instability who had been squatting in the crawl spaces of various apartment complexes in the area. She'd been monitoring the trash because she was scavenging. She'd finally been picked up by the police at a different complex 20 miles away after she tried to bite a maintenance worker. The officer asked if I'd had any contact with her besides the morning shouting matches. I told him about the night I went out at 11 p.m. and found her sitting inside the enclosure. The officer stopped writing. He looked down at his notes, then back at me with a look of pure disgust. "You saw her at 11? "Yeah," I said, my voice shaking. She was just sitting there in the corner, making that clicking sound with her tongue. The officer cleared his throat and looked away. "Son, she wasn't clicking her tongue. Based on what we found at the scene and what she confessed to, at that hour, she was usually busy stuffing her mouth with whatever discarded food she could find in the bags. She wasn't clicking. She was chewing." The image of her crouched in that dark corner, her mouth full of cold, rotting scraps, hit me like a physical blow. I could almost hear the wet, rhythmic sound of it again. Take it from me. Follow the rules, stick to the schedule, and whatever you do, don't go to the dumpsters after dark. You never know who's waiting for a meal. Chapter 3. The Two Justins. The Two Justins. Let's play some games. When I got to campus that morning, my friend Justin ran up to me looking like he hadn't slept in a week. His eyes were sunken, and his skin had a sickly pale cast. He grabbed my arm and said, "I have a huge favor to ask." "What's going on?" I asked, startled by his intensity. He told me he'd recently moved into a dirt-cheap apartment to save money, but he was convinced the place was haunted. He said he couldn't handle being there alone anymore. "Please," he begged, "just stay over for one night. I'm losing my mind." I tried to turn him down. I told him I was a coward when it came to that kind of stuff, but he looked truly desperate. There was something unsettling about his expression. His mouth was smiling, but his eyes were completely dead. I couldn't bring myself to say no. I agreed to spend the night at his new place. When two college guys spend the night together, there's really only one thing to do: drink. We hit up a corner store and loaded up on beer and bags of chips. The sky was already turning a bruised shade of purple as we walked toward his building. Suddenly, Justin winced and clutched his stomach. "Oh man, I think those tacos from lunch are catching up to me. Go ahead without me. Take the keys and head up to the apartment. I've got to run back to the store and use their restroom." What a loser, I thought, taking the keys. I started walking toward his place alone. Just as I reached the front door and was about to slide the key into the lock, I heard footsteps. Justin came running up behind me, slightly out of breath. "Hurry up, let's get inside," he said. I looked at him, feeling a flicker of confusion. "You're back already? That was fast. Is your stomach okay?" He didn't really answer. He just gave a vague nod, his eyes refusing to meet mine. It was hard to tell where he was actually looking. I figured he was just exhausted from the stress of the move and the supposed hauntings. I told him we should just get inside and start drinking. Once we were settled in, I asked him about the apartment. I figured it was better to know what kind of ghosts I was dealing with, so I could prepare myself mentally. "Oh, nothing like that actually happens here," he said with a dismissive wave. "Sorry, man. I just really wanted someone to drink with." I groaned, annoyed. "Are you serious? I was actually worried about you." My bad, he chuckled. "Hey, I'm gonna go grab the controllers from the storage closet so we can play." He got up and wandered into the small, dark room off the kitchen. I sat there, feeling a bit foolish for being so worked up. As I reached for my beer, something in the corner of my eye caught my attention. It was a hammer, lying on the floor near the baseboard. I leaned over to look closer. My heart did a slow, heavy thud in my chest. There was blood on the head of the hammer. Dark, dried blood. Before I could process what I was seeing, the doorbell rang. The sound of the buzzer was followed by a voice from the hallway. "Hey, Chris, it's me. Open up. I don't have my keys, remember? That bathroom break took way longer than I expected. Come on, man, let me in." My blood turned to ice. That was Justin's voice, but Justin was in the storage closet. I stood up, my legs shaking, and crept toward the front door. I looked through the peephole. Standing in the hallway was Justin. He looked exactly like the friend I'd been talking to all day. "Hey, what are you doing? Open the door!" the Justin in the hallway shouted. My brain was screaming. I didn't know what was happening. I reached for the deadbolt, my instinct telling me to let my friend in, but a sharp, booming voice exploded from behind me. "Don't you dare open that door!" I spun around. The Justin from the storage closet was standing in the middle of the room. His mouth was stretched wide, frozen in the shape of a scream. "Don't open it," he repeated, his voice dropping to a low, commanding tone. "Whatever you do, do not let that thing inside." I don't, I stammered. "Just stay away from the door," he said. "Come on, let's just play our game." I was trembling so hard I could barely stand. I knew for a fact that my fear wasn't just the alcohol talking. From the other side of the door, the Justin in the hallway spoke again. "Chris, what's wrong? Why are you acting like this?" Open up. Did I do something? Seriously, this isn't funny anymore. Let me in. The normalcy of his voice was the most terrifying part. Then the tone shifted. Hey, Chris, open up, open up, open up, open up, open up. The voice began to chant the words over and over, accompanied by a frantic, rhythmic pounding on the door. The doorbell started ringing incessantly, a jagged, mechanical sound that filled the small apartment. It was madness. I thanked God I'd locked the door. I realized then that the Justin inside with me had to be the fake one. I needed to get out. I needed to get to the real Justin. Chris, run! The Justin in the hallway screamed. That thing in there isn't me. What are you doing? Get out of there. I looked through the peephole again. The Justin outside looked terrified, his face contorted with genuine concern. He looked exactly like the guy I'd known for years. What are you doing? The voice came from right behind me. It was cold and mechanical. I turned around slowly. The Justin inside was standing just inches away, watching me with a look of mock concern. But his eyes were wrong. His pupils were dilated so far that the color was gone, and he wasn't blinking, not even once. Then I heard a soft metallic clink. In his right hand, he was now holding the hammer I'd seen on the floor. He gripped it tight, the dried blood on the metal glinting under the dim apartment lights. Come on, Chris, let's play. You said you'd stay the night. We're friends, aren't we? His voice had no emotion in it. It sounded like a digital recording, a perfect imitation of Justin's voice, but with a strange hollow resonance that made my skin crawl. I backed up against the front door, my heart hammering against my ribs. I was trapped. Outside, the other Justin was still screaming, begging me to open the door and run. I decided I had to take the chance. Anything was better than being in this room with a creature holding a bloody hammer. I reached for the lock, my fingers fumbling with the metal. The moment my hand touched the deadbolt, the noise in the hallway stopped. The pounding, the ringing, the screaming, it all vanished instantly. The silence that followed was so heavy it felt like it was crushing my eardrums. I held my breath, my hand frozen on the lock. Then a low, guttural voice drifted through the wood of the door, vibrating against my back. Well, actually, both of them are me. Why don't you open up and see for yourself? Chapter 4. The Invitation in the Mail. I have this habit of checking the mailbox the second I get home every evening. Usually it's nothing but junk. Coupons for a local pizza place, flyers from the car dealership down the street, or the occasional utility bill. But one day, I found a plain white envelope tucked inside. There was no stamp and no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper with one sentence written in elegant, careful handwriting. Go ahead and open it. To be honest, it creeped me out. I started being a lot more careful about locking the doors and windows after that. But the envelopes kept coming every single day. The messages changed slightly each time. One day it would just say, go ahead and open it. And the next it would be more specific, like, go ahead and open the desk drawer. It sounds ridiculous now, but I actually started following the instructions. One note told me to check the microwave, and I found a frozen dinner I'd completely forgotten I'd even put in there. Another told me to look in my desk, and there was a gold earring I'd lost months ago, sitting right on top of my pens. I seriously considered moving, but I didn't have the money for a security deposit on a new place. Since nothing bad had actually happened yet, I just tried to ignore it. But then the notes started getting bolder. They began mentioning places that no one should have known about unless they'd been inside my apartment while I was gone. One said, "Go ahead and open the storage bin under your bed." Another said, "Go ahead and open the organizer in your closet." When I looked inside those spots, I found things that made my blood run cold. In the under-bed bin, there was a pile of human fingernail clippings. In the closet organizer, I found thick, matted clumps of hair tied together with twine. I was paralyzed with fear, but I was working 60 hours a week, and I was so exhausted that I think my brain just stopped processing the danger. I wasn't thinking clearly anymore. I was just existing in a state of constant, numbing dread. Then came the day that changed everything. I got home from a long shift and found the usual plain white envelope in the box. This time, it didn't say, "Open it." It said, "Look behind the full-length mirror." My hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold the paper, but I walked over to the leaning mirror in the corner of my bedroom. I gripped the wooden frame and pulled it away from the wall. Taped to the back was a photograph. It was a picture of my bedroom, but the perspective was terrifying. It had been taken from a low, narrow angle, exactly the view you would have if you were crouching inside my walk-in closet with the door cracked just an inch. I turned the photo over. On the back, written in that same elegant, beautiful handwriting, were 6 words. "I'm in the closet right now. Go ahead and open it." Chapter 5. The Manager's Obsession. By my sophomore year of college, I was on the hunt for a new part-time job. A friend mentioned a bowling alley that was hiring, and even though it was about a 20-minute drive from campus, the pay was too good to pass up. When I called to inquire, a man with a low, mumbly voice answered. He didn't say much, just told me to show up the next day around noon, and then he hung up before I could even ask a follow-up question. I remember thinking he sounded like the type of guy who struggled with basic social cues. The next day, I pulled into the parking lot and headed inside for the interview. It wasn't much of an interview, really. A balding guy in his late 40s, wearing a greasy black tracksuit that looked like it hadn't been washed in a month, just stared at my resume in silence for a long time. This was the manager. Finally, he looked up and said, "You're hired. I need you to start as soon as possible. When can you get here?" We hammered out a schedule that put me on shifts with the more experienced staff so I could learn the ropes. The job was pretty standard, working the front desk, cleaning up the lanes, and handling minor mechanical issues. The manager almost never left the staff room, so the employees basically ran the place and trained each other. It was a weird vibe, but I didn't mind the autonomy. After about 3 months, I had the routine down. I started getting close with the other guys on staff, talking about classes, girls, and typical college stuff. The female employees, however, had nothing but bad things to say about the manager. They called him a total creep, complained that he smelled like old cigarettes and rot, and said they could never understand a word he muttered. I felt a little bad for the guy at first, thinking he was just a lonely outcast. Then, about 6 months in, 3 new people were hired. There was Tyler, a loud, energetic guy with bleached hair and a bunch of piercings. Chloe, a girl who was exactly my type, and Jenna, who was the life of the party. I was immediately struck by Chloe and wanted to find a way to get to know her, but our schedules never seemed to overlap. Instead, I was always paired up with Tyler. As I trained Tyler, I realized he was actually a great guy, quick to learn, respectful, and always upbeat. We became fast friends, and I eventually found out he was a freshman at the same college I attended. I decided to trust him and confessed that I had a huge crush on Chloe. "Oh, I know Chloe," Tyler said with a grin. "She and Jenna go out to grab food with me all the time. We all started at the same time, so we're pretty tight." I felt a momentary pang of jealousy, like I'd been left out of the loop. But Tyler immediately followed up. "Hey, if you're free after work, come with us. I'm meeting them for drinks and burgers tonight." I jumped at the chance. Tyler's social skills were top tier, and I was just grateful he was willing to wingman for me. We met up at a local tavern around 9 that night. Tyler was the perfect bridge, keeping the conversation flowing and making sure I felt included. Chloe and Jenna were both awesome, and they didn't treat me like some older guy outsider. We hit it off immediately. Before long, the 4 of us were a regular crew. Everyone at the bowling alley knew us as a package deal. Eventually, I worked up the courage to tell Chloe how I felt, and to my surprise, she said she felt the same way. We started dating, and Tyler and Jenna were as happy for us as if they'd won the lottery themselves. Life was going great, until it wasn't. One night, I got a text from Chloe. "I'm scared," it read. "What's wrong?" I replied. "It's the manager," she said. "He's staring at me. He usually stays in his office all night, but lately, every single time I'm at the front desk, he comes out and just watches me." "Did he say anything? Did he touch you?" "No," she replied. "He just stands there, staring." I called her immediately. She sounded like she was on the verge of tears. I told her we would sync our schedules from now on, so she was never alone, and that I'd stay by her side during our shifts. I also decided to take it a step further. The next day, I walked right up to the manager's office, knocked on the door, and told him straight out, "Look, Chloe and I are together. I'd appreciate it if you'd give her some space and stop hovering." I felt like a total badass in that moment, standing up for my girlfriend. The manager didn't say anything. He just blinked at me with those dull, watery eyes and retreated back into his office. I figured that was the end of it. For a while, things seemed fine. The manager stayed in his room, and I was always within arm's length of Chloe. But then came a quiet Tuesday night shift. It was just the 2 of us on the floor. The manager called me from the staff room and said the pin setter on lane 1 was acting up and needed a manual reset. I'd handled this a dozen times before, so I didn't think twice about it. I headed to the back of the house, climbed behind the lanes, and crawled under the heavy steel frame of the lane 1 machine. I was lying on my back, looking up at the gears and pulleys, trying to find the jam. I spotted a loose bolt and realized I needed a spare from the tool shed. Just as I was about to crawl out, the lights in the back of the building cut out. In the sudden, absolute darkness, I heard a heavy clunk. The safety locks on the pin setter disengaged. The massive steel weight of the machine began to descend. It didn't drop like a stone, but it moved with a steady hydraulic force that was impossible to stop. Because of the cramped space, I couldn't roll out in time. The edge of the machine caught me across my chest and right shoulder, pinning me flat against the concrete floor. The air was crushed out of my lungs. I couldn't scream. I couldn't move. I just lay there in the dark, my vision swimming, struggling to take tiny, shallow sips of air as the weight of the machine threatened to snap my ribs. I don't know how long I was under there. Minutes? Hours? Suddenly, I felt the pressure ease just a fraction. The machine groaned and lifted an inch. I used every ounce of strength I had left to scramble out from under it. I collapsed on the floor, gasping for air, tears of pure relief stinging my eyes. "Mark, are you okay?" It was Chloe's voice. Hearing her was the most beautiful thing I'd ever experienced. The adrenaline finally wore off, and the world went black. When I woke up, I was in a hospital bed. Chloe was sitting right there, clutching my hand and sobbing. "Did you get me here?" I croaked, my chest burning with every word. "I'm so sorry I scared you." "The manager brought you," she whispered. "I just followed the ambulance. I'm so sorry, Mark." "Don't be sorry," I said. "I'll have to thank the manager later for helping me." "No," she said, her voice turning sharp and desperate. "You don't understand. It was my fault. I'm the one who dropped the machine on you." "What? What are you talking about?" "The manager came out to the front desk," she sobbed. "He told me that someone had left a light on in the back and that it was going to blow a fuse. He told me to flip the breaker switch for lane 1 to save the equipment. I didn't know you were back there. I didn't know the power switch also controlled the emergency locks." The realization hit me harder than the machine had. The manager knew exactly where I was. He'd sent me back there to fix a problem that didn't exist, then convinced my own girlfriend to pull the trigger. He didn't want to just kill me. He wanted her to be the one to do it. Chloe and I both quit that night. I told Tyler and Jenna everything. They were furious, but they could see how much the trauma was eating at Chloe, so we eventually stopped talking about it just to keep her sane. Tyler and Jenna quit shortly after, cutting all ties with that place. A few weeks later, Tyler told me he'd run into one of the guys who still worked there. He said the atmosphere at the bowling alley had changed. The manager, who used to be silent and miserable, was now seen wandering the halls with a creepy, satisfied grin on his face. And every time he was alone in that staff room, the other employees could hear him through the door, humming a happy, upbeat tune to himself. Chapter 6. The Harvest Ritual and the Thing in the Woods. I recently went back to my hometown for a visit, and I heard something so unsettling that I felt I had to write it down. In the rural area where I grew up, we have a specific tradition during the autumn harvest season. After we visit the family cemetery to pay our respects, we have to carry a lit kerosene lantern from the gravesite back to the main farmhouse on foot. On its own, that sounds like a typical piece of local folklore, but there are very strict, very specific rules that everyone must follow. Rule number 1, you must never let the lantern's flame go out. If it does, you have to turn around immediately, go back to the cemetery, and light it again from the source. Rule number 2, you must never run. Rule number 3, the lantern must be carried by the youngest person in the group. If there's a baby who can't walk, it goes to the next youngest child. Rule number 4, you must never look toward the wayside shrine. That 4th rule is the one everyone whispers about. On the long dirt road between the farmhouse and the cemetery, there's nothing but miles of cornfields. But right in the middle of all that flat land, there's a small, unnatural cluster of trees, a dark little copse that feels like it doesn't belong there. Tucked inside those trees is a tiny, ancient shrine made of weathered gray stone. The rule is that as you pass that patch of woods, you cannot turn your head toward it. When I was a kid, it was my turn to carry the lantern. I remember my grandparents sitting me down and making me swear on my life that I would follow the rules. They told me that the flame held the spirits of our ancestors and we were guiding them home to the family mantle for the holiday. As a kid, I thought it was just a spooky old story, a bit of weird theater we did every year. I remember when we reached the stretch of road by the trees, my mother reached out and covered my eyes with her hands. I thought she was just playing a game with me, and I giggled and teased her as we walked. She didn't let go until we were well past the woods. We made it back to the house, transferred the flame to the candles on the mantle, and that was that. I hadn't thought about that ritual in years. But this year, since I was finally back home, I sat down with my grandmother and asked her what those rules were actually about. I told her I remembered the blindfold and asked if it was really necessary. The look that came over her face was something I'll never forget. She called me by my nickname and told me the truth behind those 4 rules, and it chilled me to the bone. She explained that the lantern isn't just a guide for ancestors. It's a shield. The flame acts as a beacon of protection. If the light goes out, you're left vulnerable in the dark. You aren't allowed to run because running triggers a predatory instinct in the thing that lives in the woods. It makes you easier to track. As for why the youngest has to carry it, she said that the presence in the fields targets the weak and the innocent first. By putting the lantern in the child's hands, the ancestral protection is at its strongest point, right where the threat is most likely to strike. And then there was the shrine. Grandma told me that if you look directly at the thing in the trees, no amount of ancestral protection can help you. She kept using the word it or that thing. When I pressed her, she leaned in close. She said that inside that stone box in the woods, there is a creature that has been there since the town was founded. She described it as a lanky, distorted thing, like a man, but with limbs that are far too long and a hunched, animalistic way of moving. She said it stays quiet most of the year, but during the harvest, it gets hungry. It has a name, a local name used by the elders, but she refused to say it out loud. She told me it was better that I didn't know, because once you know its name and start thinking about it, you start to see it. That's why my mother covered my eyes all those years ago. She was making sure I didn't catch a glimpse of something that would haunt me for the rest of my life. I started to feel a bit skeptical. It sounded like a classic campfire story designed to keep kids from wandering into the woods. I even started to smirk a little, thinking Grandma was just trying to spook me. But then she told me what happens when the ritual fails. She said that in the past, there were times when the flame went out and wasn't relit, or someone looked into the trees when they shouldn't have. Every single time that happened, someone in the family died before the next harvest. They would be taken by accidents or sudden illnesses. I told her that sounded like a tall tale, but then she looked me dead in the eye and said, "You remember Frank, don't you? He was taken by that thing last year." A wave of nausea hit me. Frank was my cousin. He died last December in a horrific car accident. He was driving down a perfectly straight, clear road in the middle of the day when he suddenly swerved his truck and went right into the river. The police never found a reason for it. No mechanical failure, no health issues, nothing. He just steered himself into the water. I had come home specifically to visit his grave. I asked her if something had happened during the walk last summer. Grandma nodded slowly. She told me that little Toby, my nephew, had been the one carrying the lantern. He was only 6. Halfway past the woods, Toby had gotten scared and looked toward the trees. He started screaming, saying he saw a tall man with long arms waving at him from the shadows. The family panicked and took him to a local preacher for a blessing, but Grandma said it didn't matter. The mark was already made. Knowing that a harmless tradition I participated in as a child actually carried such a heavy, lethal price has left me reeling. By the time I arrived in town this year, the ritual had already been performed. I went to the cemetery alone to leave flowers for Frank, but I found myself looking over my shoulder the entire time. I can't stop thinking about Toby, and I can't stop wondering if the ritual was done correctly this time. I have this gnawing anxiety that won't leave me. I think next year I'm going to make sure I'm there to walk the road myself. I need to make sure that lantern stays lit. We spend our lives building walls of logic to keep the darkness at bay. We rely on schedules, familiar faces, and the comfort of the mundane to convince ourselves that the world is predictable. But beneath that thin veneer of order, there are things that do not follow our rules, entities that anticipate our turns, voices that mimic our friends, and shadows that feast while we sleep. These stories remind us that the most unsettling things aren't always found in the unknown, but in the spaces we think we know best. Thank you for joining me. As you go about your night, pay closer attention to the shadows in your periphery and the rhythm of the sounds you usually ignore. You might find that the world is much more crowded than you ever imagined.